Hello, welcome to Book Shambles in association with Cosmic Shambles International Books of the Year. So we're going to go through our favourite books that we have read this year. When I say our favourite books, shortly I'll be joined by Helen Czerski. We're also going to be hearing from Izzy Sutton. We're going to be hearing from Chris Hadfield, from the poet Luke Wright, from Joanna Neary, from Anil Seth. I can't remember who I've forgotten. There's Steve Backshall. Did I mention Steve Backshall? Anyway, all talking about their favourite books. Quite a few people will be joining us live. Some have very kindly recorded things for us in advance. I'm going to quickly just tell you a few. It doesn't have to be a book that's come out this year. Make this very, very clear. It's just books that you've and one of the reasons that I'm doing this is because of the 100 bookshops that I visited, all of which were wonderful and delightful. I would try and name check you all, should any of you in fact, I went to one of them today. I went to the Chorleywood bookshop, walking through Woodland down there with my son. My son used his book token money on a hairy biker's cookery book because he enjoys cooking. And as I was saying to Helen before, that's something that pleases me. I think it is good when teenage boys go, yeah, I want to make some of these crazy cookery things. And also he got Matt Haig's book about a little mouse that lives with elves. I think it's called The Little Mouse That Lives with Elves. It's not, but it could be something like that. It's from Canongate. You can look it up. Anyway, the smallest book that I bought on my book tour, by the way, was this one. I don't know if you see that. That was the smallest book. That was from the Hay Cinema bookshop, which is a dictionary of mythology, because I like the idea that I would just have that fits very easily in my duffel coat pocket, and I can just look up anything there. And just so here we are, the Derona, a goddess of the Celts, usually associated by Roman historians with Mercury. It's just little things. Also, I think if you're sitting on a train, and it can be very difficult to find sometimes space on a train, as I found when I was doing all the bookshop tours, I think people would find it weird. A man who looks like me anyway, reading a very little book, they think, oh, God, I don't want to sit next to him. He's an old man with a beard. Well, they wouldn't know that because I'd have a mask on, but, they might get a hint of a beard, reading a very little book. I don't trust old men reading very little books. So it might also work for that, as well as my mythology knowledge. This is my first book of the year, by the way, which is literally I started reading today. And it's just this was given to me by Lighthouse, the Lighthouse bookshop in Edinburgh. I don't really need to say that it's delightful after any of these bookshops. Just take it as read that all of these bookshops, when read, are delightful. This is Undrowned Black Feminist Lessons from Marine Mammals. And it is absolutely beautiful. I'm just going to read you some of the little bits from the introduction. In this book, I move, mostly without warning, from a clinical tone to a profoundly intimate tone. The words "I love you" appear more than any other phrase in this book. I'm sure those words have never appeared in scientific studies about marine mammals. And this is partly, the book itself is inspired by two books about marine mammals. This is a tricky task because I'm vulnerable not only to the messiness of my emotions, but also to the possibility of just projecting onto a whole set of beings who can't verbally protest my projections. That's talking about the way she can talk about marine mammals. I absolutely love this book. It's I find one of the, who is this book for? Who is this book for? This is a book for you, also known as everyone who knows that a world where queer, black, feminine folks are living their most abundant, expressed and loving lives in a world where everyone is free. I think that is very, very beautiful. And I've just started it, and I'm so pleased I've been given this. It's such a beautiful book, Undrowned. It's from AK Press. Its inspiration was her looking at the nature of these two books about marine mammals, and then it goes into a lot of very, very interesting places. So that is already that's probably my last book of the year, because I've only just started it today. This is a very, very beautiful novel. This was given to me when I was at the Warwick bookshop. Lovely, lovely people at the Warwick bookshop. Gratitude, a novel just the way I like novels, thin, short attention span. I can get through, how many is this? Just over 130 pages, probably almost a novella. I don't know for sure, but this is just this is a novel all about someone, basically it's different voices around someone who is increasingly experiencing the effects of dementia, someone who spent most of their life dealing with language, watching as they lose their language, and those people around her trying to help her with the language. Just absolutely beautiful. So Gratitude is one of my books of the year, probably one of my novels of the year. 2 books that I'm just reading again, by the way. Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter. My God, she knew how to write, but you knew that anyway. And Ursula K. Le Guin's The Lathe of Heaven is the last novel that this year I've reckoned that I'm going to finish. And I'm so glad that I've gone back to reading Ursula K. Le Guin. Fantastic. So anyway, that's roughly what we're going to do. We're going to deal with the books of the year. This is, by the way, my favourite Agatha Christie Pan cover that I found. I don't know how well you can see. This is Evil Under the Sun. What a beautiful, beautiful illustration. My God, how I love the Pan books. I haven't got all the books I would normally have with me because I'm currently house sitting for other people, but we're going to go. Oh, this is right on a very, very different note, right? This Rob Halford from Judas Priest, which reminds me, because this is so near to the anniversary of Lemmy's death. If you've never watched The Funeral of Lemmy, where people like Rob Halford are there and Dave Grohl does the most beautiful eulogy, please watch it. Whether you like kind of rock or metal or any of those things, or rock and roll, it doesn't matter. It's a really beautiful thing to watch. But Rob Halford's autobiography, Confess, as many of you know, he's probably, I suppose, certainly in terms of the magnitude of Judas Priest, you know, he was to come out in that genre was something that he was, you know, to come out as a gay man was a major thing to do, even though so much of the kind of garb he wore already seemed to suggest that anyway. And it's just a very, very beautiful book about him and his life, and starts off with beautiful descriptions of the Black Country and the kind of sheets hanging and getting increasingly dark as they dry on the line of the Black Country. And so it starts off with very, very evocative view of him growing up in the Midlands. And then at about page 7, as early as that, he's down the youth club, and somewhere in a drawer or cupboard he finds some pornography, some images of naked men, right? So that's kind of just the beginning of him going into sexuality. And then this youth club, it sounds like it was a very interesting youth club. And another visit to the youth club, he opens a drawer and basically finds a dildo inside that drawer, and that then leads to further adventures. So it starts off with an evocative image of the Midlands in the late 50s and into the early 60s, and then eventually, well, not even eventually, quite soon, surprising things are found in drawers. So there we go. That is, I really enjoyed reading Rob Halford's autobiography, Confess. Now, who is the first person we're going to see recommending books? By the way, if you'd like to recommend books, please do go into our feed, recommend books. I will try and make sure as many of the books that you mention will say out loud that they recommend, because I mean, I've got about 70 books around me now, and that doesn't cover enough. I'm also, by the way, going to reveal the most expensive book that I bought from an Oxfam. Are you from that Oxfam? I know one of the Oxfams is probably watching this. I think they are watching it. And you think it's going to be you, and it might be you, but I'm not going to tell you now. Exeter Oxfam Bookshop. But that was an expensive book. But I'll reveal more of that later on. This, by the way, was my most expensive book that I bought from Jeff Towns. Jeff Towns, who some of you know, absolutely brilliant bookseller, expert on Dylan Thomas as well, and beat literature. And I went to basically the ground floor flat where he stores all of his books, which was just a terrifying and beautiful thing. And the most expensive book I bought from Jeff was a first edition of Harold Pinter's The Birthday Party, which is just a beautiful, which is of such a, and also, by the way, my bookmarks at the moment are from a load of postcards that I bought from, this was from a hospice shop in Stratford-upon-Avon, and that is Cary Grant, a very early promo shot. I bought a huge, so I just love The Birthday Party. It's a very funny play at times, as well as dark and strange and many other things, but it's just this beautiful moment at the beginning where a man returns home and his wife says, I've got your cornflakes ready. Here's your cornflakes. How are they? Are they nice? I love the idea of cornflakes being spoken about like it's some kind of gourmet recipe. Anyway, that was the most expensive book from Jeff. Go and find out more about Jeff Towns. His book bus is a wonderful thing as well. And in fact, one of the first events I did on the 100 Bookshop tour was me buying more books from Jeff at the Larne Weekend Festival. And the best book I got, I think, from him was UFOs and Common Sense. It's an excellent 1950s common sense book about UFOs. The kind of thing Helen Chersky, I think, would really, because she loves science, so she loves common sense takes on alien visitations. But the reason I particularly love that book, and why Dallas Campbell, who is also something a ufologist, something of a ufologist is a little bit annoyed by is I have the first edition where common sense is all one word. After that, it was reprinted and it became 2 words. So very, very exciting. Dreams about HM the Queen. You'll find more about that later on. Anyway, the first person we're going to hear from, someone who was magnificent at the Albert Hall. And by the way, any of you who did come to the Albert Hall, everyone was magnificent at the Albert Hall. Helen, who you're about to meet, did such a brilliant 10 minutes about the moon and the oceans. It was a really celebratory night. And then we had to cancel everything after that, which reminds me, by the way, do support us via Patreon if you can. Anyway, here is someone who, as I said before, was magnificent. It is Steve Backshall. And here are Steve Backshall's Books of the Year. No, I said let's do that. That's what I told you, the order there. Oh dear, Trent wasn't ready because he didn't listen to the very specific instructions that I gave. He's been breaking up the wardrobe.
Well, hello.
Hello, mate. So you've asked me to review my book of the year. I was very tempted to go with The Importance of Being Interested,
by Will
but kind of
Dean.
figured
Haven't read
that
anything
you
else
think
by Will
that I
Dean.
was
I know he
basically...
writes like a series of detective books that I'm yet to read. One of them is behind me, actually. The Last Thing to Burn I read in about probably 26 hours. I just literally couldn't put it down. It's about a woman who's being kept captive in a desolate farmhouse by a man who calls her Jane, but that's not her name. It is so intense. You feel like you're in the cottage. And I think part of the reason I loved it is because lockdown was a bit grim, so it made me feel better that there was someone in a worse situation than me. I hate to admit, but it's incredible. It's incredible writing. It's just so taut. There is no filler at all, and it was brilliant. The second one is Swing Time by Zadie Smith. I'm very embarrassed to admit that I hadn't read anything else by Zadie Smith, and now I will because I absolutely loved it. It's very different from The Last Thing to Burn. It's about an unnamed character who's the protagonist. It's about kind of her life growing up and her love of dance, and it's so funny and so sad and so human, and she's mixed race, and it's set in lots of different places, and she works for someone who's trying to do a lot of good, but kind of perhaps messes things up a little bit. It's really funny, and it's great. Very different from Last Thing to Burn, but it also made me want to do ballet again, so I won't do that. But, you know, for the time that I was reading it, it took me back to those dusty halls of doing dance classes with all the other kids. The third one, there are 2 more, is A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness. And that is a young adult book. And I was like, it's a young adult book. I'm not going to be affected by this. And I was crying almost immediately. I'd say sobbing, actually. It's about a young boy called Connor whose mother is dying. And there's a tree in it that comes to life. And the tree teaches him some lessons. That's the best way of explaining it. But it's not like a tree comes to life and says everything's going to be okay. The tree's a tricky tree, and it's so sad and it's brilliant. You feel like you've been transported to a different place, which is what I love about reading. And the last one is O. William by Elizabeth Strout. I love the title to this because it's got an exclamation mark in it, which you actually don't see very much. O, William, exclamation mark. It's by Elizabeth Strout and it's in the Lucy Barton series, but I wouldn't say that you have to have read My Name is Lucy Barton to get it. It's probably one of the best books I've ever read. It's so human, and it's about Lucy's, the central character's, relationship with her ex-husband, which is very complicated. And it's tender, it's funny, it's heartbreaking. So they're my 4 recommendations. Happy Christmas. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. I tell you what, Steve Backshall has probably spent 10 years working the wilds trying to perfect his Izzy Sooty impersonation. And I have to say, I think this was the one where he really nailed it. That was Izzy Sooty, because there's been 2 mistakes already. See if you can spot all 10 mistakes in the show over the next 90 minutes. Yeah, already there's one of the mistakes. It's meant to only be an hour. But I am not overly confident we'll manage to do it in an hour. But yeah, that was Izzy Sooty. And I should mention again, in terms of novels that I love, and I didn't read as many novels this year, but Jane is Trying by Izzy, and I don't just say this because I know Izzy and I've always enjoyed her work, but it's a fantastic novel. She builds such a full world instantaneously. You are immediately drawn to her character, Jane. I really recommend Jane is Trying. I also quickly mentioned John Ottaway very kindly gave me a bunch of comic books by this person here, John Tucker. They're really kind of interesting. I'm going to recommend another comic book shortly, but now we are joined by Helen Chersky. Hello, Helen.
Hello.
Right, you had this year the excitement of being a judge on a book prize. What was that?
Yeah, so I was the 6 judges for the Bayley Gifford Prize for non-fiction, which is the UK's kind of big non-fiction prize. So, and I read a lot normally, and I had to read more this year, and it was a really educational process, because I do read widely, but probably like you, I get sent books, and there are people I know who write books, and so my reading tends to be, I have a lot of that to get through before I get to anything else. And I loved this because it was just like all the books, and there were a lot of them, and yeah, it was such a pleasure as well, coming out of lockdown, just sitting in an actual room with people talking about books for 4 hours in that first meeting. I was so happy. So yeah, it was a very interesting process, and it was also interesting being in a room with people who think about books all the time, not in the way you and I do perhaps, but as a sort of formal literary thing. And they are superb writers and editors and everything else. But they had such good memories for like chapters in books. And I think you've got that, and that me not so much, but they remember like, oh, wasn't there something similar in chapter 3 of this other book published 10 years ago? How can you possibly remember that? So I got an insight into their mind as well, which was good for me and good for me, because I don't analyze writing, whereas they analyze writing all the time, and that was very good for me. But I loved doing it. Please ask me to judge book prizes. I loved it.
Oh, I think it's opened a portal to hell. I think you've made a terrible mistake possibly by saying that. Now, before you mention some of the ones that were nominated, indeed the one that won, you said there were 2 that you would love to have seen on the list that weren't on the list.
Well, there were 2 that were honestly never going to be really on the list, because the was, the standard was so high. But I really did love both these books. One of them was Spare Parts by Paul Craddock, which is a history of transplants, which sounds a bit gory, but it's written with it's like a real knowledge of the social history, not just, this organ came from there and went in there and it went wrong, because it did go wrong a lot, but it was just fun book. So Spare Parts, I highly recommend that. And the other one was Scoff, which is about the history of class and food in Britain. And again, it's just a fun book. It's the kind of book you could dip in and out of, because it's like, oh, afternoon tea and all the I had never thought about, because I grew up in the north, right, where tea was, when I was growing up, that was sort of something that happened around 4 or 5ish. It wasn't afternoon tea, but it wasn't dinner. Like your tea was what we would call dinner now, but it was kind of a bit earlier, and I'd never really thought about how these words like tea as a thing you have during the day meandered around. So I loved those 2 books just because they were fun and interesting, and there were loads of ideas in them I hadn't heard. And the Spare Parts one is a little bit gory, but it is so well worth it. So yes, those were great. And then I kind of have to talk about the shortlist, because those were the good books. So here I've stacked them all up. Here they are. So it's the one at the bottom that won. But the book I wanted to tell you about, I'm not going to hold all those up, is this one. So in my excitement, I'm knocking things all over the place. Now, this is a book of essays, and books of essays very rarely sort of fit into, they're sort of gone out of fashion a bit. Phil, we want novels, we want big stories, all of that stuff. This guy's a poet. He currently lives in America, and he's writing about so it's a series of essays that go through different things, and he's an absolutely stunning writer. But he's writing about the things you don't talk about. Sort of slightly awkward things happen in life, and you meet people, and there's things that you just don't talk about. So it's called Things I Have Withheld. And and particularly in the context of race, that's mostly the context of what he's writing about. But it's such a beautiful book. And anyone who is just up for beautiful writing for its own sake, as well as for the ideas. I highly recommend this. So yeah, I really want to sort of talk about this one because I feel it's not the one most people would pick up, because we don't pick up books of essays. But this has sort of made me think again about books of essays.
That's made me think of two things there. One, which is in my top books of the year, but I haven't got a copy with me at the moment, is Eddie Glaude Jr.'s Begin Again, just thinking on the race issues, which is an incredible book, so beautifully written. It's a beautifully written book where his inspiration is a writer who writes so beautifully that you must almost be, just in constant fear, because it's James Baldwin. It's basically about how he used the work of James Baldwin to inspire him after Trump's victory. And by the way, anyone, if you have Mubi, by the way, that movie streaming thing, watch the James Baldwin documentary about him in Paris. It's really interesting. And the other thing, when you were mentioning essays, I've really enjoyed Jeanette Winston's book 12 Bites, about kind of artificial intelligence and different, lots of different thoughts about also, things like Ada Lovelace and attitudes of women in science and the ideas of consciousness and what makes so many different things there. Jeanette Winston is just one of those writers you just go, just an incredible mind. Her brilliance as a novelist, her brilliant memoir as well. Some of her work, like Gut Symmetry, those things where you think, when you see someone's incredible level of understanding of a very deep idea, which is only expressed in a single line of a novel, and you think, wow, the number of books that single line is built on. But that in terms of
I've heard a lot about that, but I've heard so much about that. I haven't read it yet, but yes, that sounds very good. About some of the others, so I said, I tell you the other good thing about judging that I hadn't really anticipated is that if you read books in completely different genres, like just pick some number, there will be overlaps because they're all talking about the same world. And just as a pair in here, so free. So one of these is about Robert Maxwell, which is Fall, and you'd think, how could you possibly write anything about him because he's just been written about to death? It's a really good story. And then Aftermath is about Germany after the Second World War, and Robert Maxwell got medals for fighting in the Second World War. Where he came, his sort of origin story is woven in, and so there are overlaps in these two books that you would not expect. And I really enjoyed the idea that you've got this sort of quite a sort of a romp type of a biography, a sort of gallop through, isn't this crazy story, and then this really serious examination of like, what do you do with a society when there are no rules, like there is no country, like half of the population don't have houses, money doesn't make any sense, what do you do? And yet the idea that those two books have very specific overlaps, that was just a huge amount of fun. And the other
Maxwell book I also will, because of what the court today, which is so something really fat. I don't know if it's not something I've delved into too far. There's a few websites, news websites that I've looked at that have basically written a kind of misery memoir of Ghislaine Maxwell about which had a very difficult childhood, and it's a really odd thing to me. And I don't know if you feel this, which is almost to write pieces where the first 5 paragraphs begin to suggest not exactly an alibi, but a series of excuses. And for that to immediately be, and I wonder how true that would be of someone who did not come from a position of power or have been a socialite, or be someone who has been around the kind of the journalistic table as well, I would imagine.
Yeah, and I think because I think it's, people struggle. There's a line between, there's a genuine backstory in that, like, a lot of people are screwed up in all kinds of ways. How did this person get screwed up in that way? That's a valid question. But like you say, so often it comes across as an excuse. Oh, well, this happened to them. Oh, well, this happened to them. And I'm sure elements of both are true. If someone had an abusive childhood, was abused, that's not their fault. And it may well have implications in later life. But I think it's one of those things where humans find it very difficult to hold more than one idea in their head at the same time. And you're right, they do sound a lot of if you read, and she is mentioned in Fall in sort of peripherally, but if you read about this crazy life she grew up in, you're like, well, frankly, if you came out of that and you're a sane human being, that's a whole, that would be worthy of note by itself, because everything that comes from this situation that's all gone rotten in its various ways. There's no way you can escape that. But we're all sort of fascinated by, why did that happen to them and not to someone else? And so often that sounds like an excuse. when it
should.
Yeah,
that's what I felt the way it was written. A couple of pieces, I just thought, God, you haven't got the balance of this right at this immediate stage. This kind of it's. I mean, I was thinking that did Hallie Rubenhold's The Five win the Bayley Gifford?
Yes, the couple of years before, I think. Yeah, that's
because
right.
That I think is such an interesting book because it's just a book about the victims of Jack the Ripper. But when I say just a book, I mean it's not about Jack the Ripper. It's about the women's life, and to me that was such a you suddenly go, oh, these are the stories that need to be told, because there are so many books about serial killers, about written from the perspective of the serial killer, from the abuser, all of that kind of about their life. And I thought Hallie Rubenhold, it felt like it was a real change, that a sea change that is required in some of the ways these things are written.
Yeah, but it's also, I mean, it's interesting because it's also, I mean, we have this classic story of a hero, right? There's always that's the way we're fed it through films and through lots of books. And there is this like, where's your hero? Where's your number one superstar who the world revolves around? And the idea for a human that there are lots of stories and that everyone is kind of the center of a different story, and those stories all have equal validity, basically, that we're not very good with that. Everyone's like, well, who's the big star? And I think we do need to switch off that that desperate, and this is what sort of Twitter and celebrity culture they do, is that they create lists, basically hierarchies. Who's the most important person? We will only talk about them. And the idea, so I know I talk about Hawaii a lot, but they have this thing where they sort of talk story. They that's the phrase they use, but they say they'll each tell their own story. Like, you have to ask the others about their story. Like, they don't prioritize their stories. They're like, oh, well, I can tell you my story, but you'll have to look elsewhere to find the other stories. Like, it kind of make you do the work, which is a much more human, it kind of levels everything. So yeah, it is frustrating, I think. But yeah, there are lots of good books now. I think Hallie's book really, like you say, it's why not do that? It's like Natalie Haynes writing about the women of Troy. Like, why not? Why have we not heard about the wife of Menelaus? Penelope. Was it Penelope? I'm not very good at the classics. Anyway,
we'll get Natalie on. Don't worry. I'm going to get this book for you, by the way, Undrowned.
Because
I think you'd be really. I just it's such a because you first of all you just go. You're immediately drawn in. How enigmatic! Black feminist lessons from marine mammals, Undrowned, and you just think that's what. And then I started reading it. It's just beautiful. What's your? You don't. When I say book of the year, it doesn't have to be. It's not going to be that someone's going to come around your house and then tell you off because actually there was another book that was at this current time asking you, what is the book do you think that's perhaps had the greatest, made the greatest impression on you, or perhaps changed you the most? And I know it's a hard thing to say within the space of 1 year, but sometimes there are certain books, aren't there, which just go, these things have changed.
I should have thought about that question before coming on here, because I would have had to stare at my bookshelves for a long time. But I think in a way, I think it really is the winner of the Bayley Gifford Prize, because that's why it won, because you read it and there is such evil in the world. That is what's good about Empire of Pain, which is about the Sackler family and the drugs, how they made their money from selling prescription opioids. What's good about it is it totally takes them to the cleaners, but it's restrained. Like, you can feel the anger, you can feel the injustice, but all it does is lay the facts in front of you. And I think it's really, like, what's good about it is it's really kind of uplifting, because we get so much raw anger in society, right? We get so much, oh, this person did this sort of easy anger. And what I found so reassuring about, it's a horrible story, it's one that very much needs to be told, but what I'm starting to care about more than anything else is the way that stories are told. I'm so sick of tribal arguments. I'm so sick of Twitter and aggression and like this tribal me, you, me, you, me. And the thing that mattered to me about Empire of Pain was that this is how we need to have discussions. We need thorough research, honest, but things presented, the right things presented with honesty, but without judgment, because that's far more powerful. Yeah. When you do then make your own judgment, it's a far more powerful thing than just being told to be angry. And that's why it mattered to me. It's not just about the story itself. It's that I'm so reassured that this is in the world, because we need more of it.
Sorry, I was vaguely distracted. I hear a background noise. This has happened before. I'm not at my house, and there's a dog having a noisy dream in the background. So as you said that, I thought I have no idea how people are interpreting your very serious point there, while the dog is currently chasing a rabbit in its mind. I know we don't know fully what dogs are dreaming, but nevertheless, thank you so much for joining us, Helen. And again, thank you it was so great having you at the Albert Hall. That really was magnificent. So we're going to now who should we have next? Now I wonder if Izzy Suttie does as good an impression of Steve Backshall. Let's find out if it works both ways. So here is Izzy Suttie doing what she imagines would be Steve Backshall's Books of the Year.
Hello, mate. So you've asked me to review my Book of the Year. I was very tempted to go with The Importance of Being Interested, but kind of figured that you'd think that I was basically kissing butt. So instead, I'm going to talk you through some of the books that I've been reading this year. Now, as you know, most of my bookcases are essentially filled up with animal books because, you know, that's sort of what I do. Notice I also got the BAFTA in there, just a little massive name drop. But also, as a dad, I have a tremendous amount of kiddie reading to do as well. And this year, we've had some corkers. So this one, Birds by Miranda Kristofnikov, is a fantastic read. The little ones will just react to the pictures, which are absolutely beautiful, but the words have got a surprising amount of really intriguing content in them as well. So that's been a real high point. Also, this one here, We Have a Dream by my bird girl, Rose Craig, is an absolutely essential read for youngsters. Just ignore the fact that she is a doctor. She has a PhD and she's like 14 or 15, which, you know, to be frank, just shouldn't be allowed. Some other books that I've been reading that have been really good for the youngsters I would include the Extinct series by Ben Garrod. So he's written a whole bunch of them. There's a whole bunch more coming as well. This one is Trilobites. We have, I'm not even going to try and say that one. Dunkleostus, Tyrannosaurus Rex, Hallucigenia. I think he's got Thylacine coming out pretty soon as well. These are really cool because they talk about extinction as something which is natural, as something which happens as the course of life and with so many different factors affecting it. And it puts it forward as a situation which can be dealt with pragmatically. And I think that's really important, particularly when you're introducing big subjects to young people. And, you know, I'll be frank, even though this is definitely a family age range kind of book, there was plenty in there that I myself learnt from and really enjoyed. But my book of the year is going to be this. It is The Secret Life of Fish by Doug Mackay-Hope. I have to put in a bit of a sort of interest here, which is that Doug was one of the guys who helped me develop Deadly 60 right at the very beginning. So we go back a long way, Doug and I, and he's an incredibly talented individual. This runs through many of the different groups of fish, and it has a scientific layout, but really, to be frank, what he's done is he's picked the most beautiful and the most interesting of the 20,000 odd different species of fish and just talked about what makes them special. And so it is absolutely fascinating. You could flick to any single page of this and find something that you don't know about. For example, the brown-banded bamboo shark or the common thresher shark, and there will be something in there that's going to blow your mind. It's a book you could read from cover to cover. It is that interesting, but at the same time, for someone like me, being able to flick straight to the weedy sea dragon and find out a few things about sea dragons, which he describes as being the hummingbirds of the sea, and it will have you completely intoxicated. It's a beautiful book. It'll be a fabulous present for anyone for Christmas, and I would advise anyone to get stuck in. So that's it. That's my book of the year. I'm very sorry that I didn't choose yours, Robin, but, you know, it was a close call. Anyway, all the very best from me, Stevie B!
Yeah, no, you had a rougher journey back than I did. Make it only just.
Hello, welcome back. I just going to recommend. There's so many books. Darren Mcnaughty, who is he's done another book already. He's still not left school. He still hasn't finished his A levels. We were talking before, as you know, about book judging, and I was on a panel judging non-fiction books, and it was Darren Mcnaughty's Diary of a Young Naturalist that won, which so does. And this is just a really beautiful. I'm not going to say it's a children's book. It's just a beautiful illustrated book. The nature of wildlife and the countryside and engaging with it, and Dara is to me just a very, very inspirational figure. I'm also going to mention another novel. This is Your Friend Forever. We recently talked to Zena Barry. This is one of those books where you're really just fighting all the time to tell people it's out there, that it's brilliant, that it's an incredibly funny, moving novel, that it is very, very real in the way that it deals with the emotions of what it says. It starts off basically, it is a teenager and she's so in love with a band, and it's her beautiful, kind of sometimes crazy, filled with love and admiration and obsession for the band. And then it's about her in middle age, when life has now, it's not ended up being quite as you might help. When you're a teenager, you have those moments where you lie in bed, maybe you've got a friend staying over, and you talk about where you're going to be when you grow up and what's going to happen, and then reality happens. And but it's so brilliantly written. Your Friend Forever by Zena Barry. It's from Unbound, and not enough people know it's out there. Not enough people know how brilliant it is. So that is one of my recommendations for. And also, by the way, back on the James Baldwin thing, when I was down at Toppings in Bath, I had that awful moment where I thought maybe today I'll manage to get out of the bookshop without buying a new book, and I hadn't noticed there's this James Baldwin biography, and it's not from the last year. It's actually from a couple of years back. As I mentioned, Eddie Glaude's book as well. But yes, so there's another recommendation for you. I've got so many recommendations, but now I'm going to speak to someone who, another of my books of the year. Consciousness is such an interesting area to write about, because so often it is written about in such a dull way, sometimes in such a kind of way where you think, well, this is all very well for the kind of philosophy that you would see Donald Sutherland maybe talking about in National Lampoon's Animal House or something like that. But actually getting that balance between something which is really rooted in research and where we're beginning to move to, and at the same time also a riveting story of why minds appear to be as they are so far, is a very, very tricky thing. And Being You by Anil Seth is the best book I've read on consciousness for a long time. It's definitely now my top 3 books about consciousness, and I've wasted a lot of time reading about consciousness. So one of our books of the year, and here is the author of that book, Anil.
Hello, Robin. Thanks for inviting me along.
Well, it's now we're not going to talk about your book because I've said all the thing. We don't need to say anymore. But it really is. It's very, very approachable, and it's also I would highly recommend, if you're kind of debating whether to buy Anil's book, watch his TED talk because that will kind of show you roughly some of the places that you're going to go. So, what have you been reading this year? Because had you finished the book by the beginning of this year, or were you still going through?
Read fewer books this year than normal because I was still deep in the editing process at the beginning of the year, and kind of signed off on a manuscript around April, and then it came out in September. So I'm a bit lower, but I have still been reading stuff. And I think the book that one of the first books I read this year that really stuck with me. By the way, I did not read the instructions, so my books are all books that I think are from this year.
They can be any. There's no hard and fast rules.
So, well, that's good. That is a read. So the first book was something I read early in the year, and it is by another science writer who's been a big inspiration to me while I've been trying to, because my book Being You is the first time I've tried to write a trade book, a book for the general public, and it's a really hard thing to do. And one of the inspirations that I just think, this is an amazing example, if I could be like this, that would be great, is Carlo Rovelli. Carlo Rovelli is a physicist and a beautiful writer. So when you read him, for me, it's not like reading a book about science. It's just like reading a great piece of writing that happens to be about science and philosophy. And he also happens to be one of the preeminent theoretical physicists of our time, and a super nice guy too. And his new book is called Helgoland or Heligoland. It seems to be different in different languages. And I don't have a copy because it's the thing I actually listened to. I didn't read it. So it's the one thing that I only listened to on Audible. And it's a story. It's both a story about some key characters in the quantum revolution of the early 20th century, and a meditation on quantum mechanics and the nature of reality, and a vehicle for some of Carlo's own I think, provocative and compelling ideas. So Helgoland is this island off the coast of Norway in the North Sea. And the story begins with Werner Heisenberg, who's one of the architects of modern quantum mechanics, going to this island for a few weeks because he was trying to get rid of his hay fever, and they didn't have antihistamine tablets. You can go pop down and get from Boots. So he went to this windswept island where there was basically no vegetation, just rocks and water. And while he was there, had this insight about how the basic mathematics of quantum mechanics should work. And Carlo Rovelli does a brilliant job of giving us a feel for that without going into the weeds too much to lose people. And then he explores the evolving story of how, I think he gets at how weird quantum mechanics is in a very clever way, which is turning into a story about the characters, about Heisenberg, about Niels Bohr, this sort of grandee of physics who had this incredible aptitude for diplomacy among all the key players in quantum physics, and Erwin Schrödinger, another of the sort of young scientists of the day who was trying to solve other parts of the mysteries of the quantum world. It's just a beautiful exposition of something that I think it's still true when we say that if you think you've understood quantum mechanics, then you have not understood quantum mechanics. It's so mysterious. I mean, people often actually think about consciousness and quantum physics. They often associate the two because they both seem quite difficult to fit into our picture of the universe as this sort of physical thing. But I actually think that's putting just two mysteries together and saying consciousness is mysterious and quantum mechanics is mysterious. They must be related. Now, Carlo's own theory about quantum mechanics is this idea of relational quantum mechanics, which is the idea that things don't exist in and of themselves. They only exist in relation to other things. And I kind of love this idea, and I'm not a physicist, so I don't know whether it will stand up or whether it's testable. But it's a very, I think, beautiful and poetic, and I would love it if it were true. And for me also, trying to think about how consciousness emerges from matter, it really enriches our picture of what matter is, and therefore what it might be capable of. So that for me was the first book that I thought was just a brilliant start.
I think Carlo Rovelli is, and as you said, as someone who is such a revered and cutting edge theoretical physicist, to actually be that level of practicing physicist and be able to write a book, because I think Helgoland would be one of my books of the year. His previous Order of Time, I think, is an incredible, and I've read that about 3 times. Of course, I still don't understand it. I mean, that's the thing. I banged on about this a lot when I was touring my book, which is go back to books, read them more than once. Science books, you don't expect you're going to learn it all in one fell swoop, because this person may well have spent 20, 30 or 40 years studying this. So you're not going to get the whole contents of their mind in reading it in 2 weeks. And I think Carlo Rovelli is someone who writes in such a thrilling and beautiful and poetic manner that it is always a joy to return to as well. And there's a collection of essays as well. I forget the title. That came out a little bit before that. It's a lovely collection.
Oh, yeah. No, that's a really good point, actually, because I think there are some science books that you read and you think, I've got to read that again, because you know that you didn't get it. You know that there were parts that escaped you, or just a billion footnotes or something like that. But with Rovelli, you read it, and the beauty of it is you think you got it. You think that I basically got the flow of it because he's so lyrical. But then it's a little bit like a dream. You think you've got it, and then 2 days later it's like, what exactly was it that I got? And so I think it does. I think it does work. I haven't reread it, but I certainly ought to and will.
I would definitely put Helgoland. Anyone watching this, there are so many books about quantum mechanics, and I think there are too many books about quantum mechanics in terms of popular books, which are, and I would put Helgoland right at the top. And then maybe Philip Ball's Beyond Weird.
Beyond Weird.
Yeah. And I would say there's lots of books where you'll basically read the same thing in a slightly different language or different philosophical interpretations of wave-particle duality. And Carlo's book was one where I had that revelation in the bath of suddenly going, oh, hang on, this is almost taking shape in my head. I know it isn't, but it's the closest it's got to being a tangible, comprehensible shape of beginning to understand what this means.
I think the other one I would put up there, I wasn't going to talk about this today, but the other one that has been actually, I think, the harvest of quantum mechanics books, popular books, it's been really good. There's a period where they were all a bit, I think, over the top, but Colour of Bayley, indeed Philip Ball's book, and then Adam Becker's book, What Is Real?
Oh, I thought
that was really excellent too. It's kind of neutral, because a lot of them push one particular interpretation of quantum mechanics, whether it's a sort of like everything exists at once, many worlds, and so. But Adam Becker's was a very neutral but persuasive account of how these different views of reality might sit together. But I also wanted to mention not just quantum mechanics. The other book that really stuck with me this year, and I bang on about this to everybody, and it's going to be a fairly obvious choice, I think, is Clara and the Sun.
Yeah, I've still not read it. People seem to absolutely adore this.
I absolutely adored it. I mean, I absolutely adore Ishiguro's writing in general. I have not read The Buried Giant. I haven't tackled that one yet. It's sort of long. But from Remains of the Day to Never Let Me Go, and now to Clara and the Sun, his writing is so limpid. It's so clear. It's one of the few writers like him and somebody like Cormac McCarthy. They're writers where I will just have to stop and go back and reread a sentence again and again, just for the beauty of that particular sentence. It just arrests you. The book as a whole hangs together beautifully as well, but I think if it's just, every sentence is so well designed. It's perfectly poised emotionally, rhythmically, and there's everything about it as well. I don't also, like Helen was saying, I have no idea how to formally analyze books at all. But his writing is simply beautiful, powerful, and poetic. And Clara and the Sun, so the basic idea of it, the basic premise, is a bit like Never Let Me Go. I think it's the best kind of science fiction in that it doesn't make many grand leaps. It makes one leap and leaves pretty much everything else about society more or less as we might consider it now, and then explores the implications. Like, this is a bit like Ex Machina as well. It just does enough to the film by Alex Garland. There's just enough to get us thinking. And in Clara and the Sun, Clara is what they call an artificial friend. So a humanoid robot that plays the role of companion to a young girl who is sick. And I'm not going to give any spoilers away, but there are developing relationships between this young girl, Josie, Clara, who's the robot, and the other people, the other family members involved. It's quite a small cast. But uniquely, I think the book begins from the perspective of Clara, from the perspective of the robot, the artificial friend. And so there's this assumption that indeed this robot is conscious. So we get back to consciousness as well. One of the reasons it stayed with me. But it's an exploration of what artificial consciousness might be like if it were possible for it to exist. And it's almost like there's an old philosophical thought experiment, like what is it like to be a bat by Tom Nagel, dwelling on however much we humans know about the brains of bats and their senses and echolocation. We can never have the experience that a bat has. I can never experience what it's like to be Robin Ince. And this book does such a fantastic job of conveying what it might be like to be an artificial friend like Clara. But then the rest of the book unpacks the sort of darker underbelly of what's really going on here, about what happens when society gets to a point where machines start to play these kinds of roles and what our moral obligations are to them, how we treat them. There's lots of, I think, fairly clear allegories here to how we treat other races, other peoples, other animals. And it just explores this territory through these developing characters of Clara and the family. And as it develops, it just reaches heights of poignancy that I rarely remember encountering in any book. And it really made me think about the kinds of things I think about anyway, like what it is to be yourself, what consciousness means, what new technologies are doing to society, whether willfully or inadvertently. And Ishiguro just distills all this into crystalline, elegant, delicate, poised prose that I want to read this book again, not because I'll learn more, but I'll learn more about writing, but just because it was a delight in what books can do. And it's rightly being regarded, I think, as just another masterpiece from one of our greatest all-time writers.
Anil, thank you. Anil, thank you so much. And we'll mention again also, obviously, being you. Should I just tell everyone watching, by the way, it was me that made him put the copy of the book up face out. I said, that's the kind of thing they do on Newsnight. Yeah, that's the way it's meant to be. Thank you very much. Have a happy new year. Being you, obviously, is out now currently. When's it come paperback? In May, I presume? Or
paperback like next summer, I think now. Yeah.
Brilliant. So, and we'll put up, by the way, all of the recommendations at some point as well. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much, by the way. We're getting people.
But I'm out of time.
Yeah. Oh, man. Yeah. Just show them again. Show them again.
Okay. Show you very quickly. The Rat Line by Philip Sands. This incredible story of a guy who. It's a story of a Nazi war criminal who was disappeared in Rome, and then writes a lawyer who met his son and developed a friendship with his son. And there's this beautiful telling of how the Nazi Otto von Wachters, how his son struggles to come to terms with his own father's past. And it interconnects in so many unexpected ways with Philip Sands.
I'll tell you what we'll do, Anil. I've got an idea. We'll do a follow up. All of the people on this, because I know they're not going to have time to mention all the books. We'll do a pre-record, and we'll do a Book Shambles extra to cover those other three. Was Piranesi in that selection of books, by the way? Everyone said, I've still not read that. Everyone says it's great. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you everyone for watching. We've got loads more coming up, including, as I mentioned before, Chris Hadfield, Joanna Neary. We've got a little bit from Helen Zaltzman as well. I'll introduce that shortly. A quick mention of some other books, by the way. I've talked about this one a lot, but it's just such a great book. John Higgs's book, William Blake versus the World. Again, in terms of about consciousness, in terms of ideas about imagination, it is absolutely fantastic, and I would really recommend that. Because there's so much. I'm trying to like something which I'd never known about, which is hyperphantasia and aphantasia. And look it up, aphantasia. It's such an incredible idea. But yeah, John Higgs is William Blake versus the World, and I think it's still online. I did an interview with him for the British Library, and that should still be up. And that also includes, amongst other things, Selena Godden, who was there. And Selena Godden's Mrs. Death is definitely one of my books of the year. A very, very beautiful novel dealing with death, and also dealing with therefore telling you sometimes how to live as well. Around and round it goes, life and blood and love and death and time and space, around and round we go, spinning on this pretty blue rock in space we call planet Earth. Fish grew legs, birds grew wings, monkeys walked upright and tall, and that's when things got interesting for me. So that is a marvellous book. And now we're going to hear a little bit from Helen Zaltzman. Here is Helen Zaltzman.
Hello, I'm podcaster Helen Zotzman, and these are my favourite books that I've read in 2021. Probably my very favourite was this one, The Address Book by Deirdre Mask. I was just browsing in my local bookshop, Bookseller Crow in Crystal Palace, where I make a lot of serendipitous book discoveries, and I saw the subtitle, which is What Street Addresses Reveal About Identity, Race, Wealth and Power, and I thought, oh, sounds interesting. And it was very interesting. It's a really fun book to read and really fascinating, because wherever you walk around, the stuff in there is applicable, and street names and house numbers aren't a default thing. Like, they were a relatively late addition in a lot of places, and sometimes very controversial. There were some violent protests about house numbering. It's extraordinary way to look at the world around you. So I really recommend that. You'll learn a lot in a fun way. I also read some really good but pretty sad memoirs. Read quite a lot of those this year. And two of my favourites were, firstly, Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner, which is about the death of a parent, but it's also really funny and a really beautiful piece of writing. Also some very good food in it. There's a lot of amazing Korean food in it. So I recommend that if you think, oh, well, now I wish I knew how to make my own kimchi after you've read a book. I also really liked How to Lose Everything, a memoir by Krista Couture, who's a Canadian musician and performance artist. And again, gorgeous writing, pretty funny. It is about her losing two babies and also a leg to cancer, but it's not a misery memoir. It's just I'd never really read a book before that made me so aware of what it might be like to inhabit someone else's body. So that was incredible too. I also really like the novel Detransition Baby by Tori Peters. It's been a really good reading year. Very exciting.
Hello, welcome back. As I said, I'm about to read out. I've had lots of fantastic recommendations, some of which I agree with and some of which I didn't know about. So that's always exciting. And also, as I said, shortly coming up, we've got Chris Hadfield. We've got Johnny Maines. We'll probably be talking about some of the kind of horror stuff that we've been up to. Very shortly, I'm going to speak to Joanna Neary as well. Quickly mention, again, another book I've mentioned a lot, Pragya Agarwal's Motherhood. We never quite worked it out, Josie and me. Motherhood. I think it is actually Motherhood. That will do because in brackets, but just again such an inspiring and a book that just in terms of helping people. And there's a book that I rambled on a lot about called Others, which is a collection of different people writing about their otherness and the importance of the fact that what books allow you is empathy. And of course we have this perpetual battle to against those people who have no empathy, and that bit of trying to get into people's minds. And this is just a little bit from Pragya's book. This book is about the relationship women have with their bodies, sometimes fractured, sometimes fractious, but so often not whole or entirely satisfactory. Women's bodies can be seen as a threat. They become a battleground, desired and lusted upon, but also considered a monstrosity, defiled regularly, stigmatized and not their own terrain to navigate. While being placed on a pedestal and worshipped as goddesses, they are also being monitored, patrolled, controlled and abused. The body, the shell we inhabit all our lives, seem alien to us, and we spend so much time in this scrimmage between our own selves, pulling and pushing against our own bodies, moulding and shaping them to surrogate selves. She's a really great writer. And just going to mention this because this one, Why Marian Faithfull Matters. This is a whole series of Faber and Faber books. There's also Why Karen Carpenter Matters, Why Solange Matters. This is the only one I've read so far. I've found that very, very interesting, and Marian Faithfull does matter, of course, as well. The Magic Box by Rob Young, who you might know wrote Electric Eden. This is about predominantly kind of 1970s and then beyond television, quite often quite uncanny television, sometimes the work of Nigel Neal, Sapphire and Steel, things like that as well. Like Electric Eden, this is just a very, very... weirdly, I thought he must be the same age as me because so many of the influences are the same, but actually he's older, except I probably look older. And another one that I think's been recommended by someone, this, but I absolutely loved it, Listen by Catherine Mannix, who this is about how we listen to people who are feeling bereft, people who are grieving, people who have a sense of loss, of melancholy, of all of these. And it starts off with just a very, very powerful story of when she was a young doctor and she had to tell someone that their husband had died, and that person punched them in the face, and she tells that story she's just a really humane person. So Catherine Mannix's Listen is another. I'm never going to get through all the books of the year. I haven't even got through the first half of the pile. This is a disaster. Anyway, Joe. Here's Joanna Neary. Hi, Joe.
Hello, Robin. I was just unmuting myself like a professional. Now, because I'm in Cornwall, I don't have any books with me that I've read this year. So I've just done a drawing. So the book I recommend this year, my favourite book, was Nobody's Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood. And as you can see, the cover has got pink clouds on it. So look out for that in Waterstones.
Now, what is it, that book?
Well, it's based on a true story in her life, I think. And it's beautiful prose. And I would really recommend reading her memoir, Priest Daddy, before reading Nobody's Talking About This, because I think it really helps to know the characters that are in the book. I mean, basically, it's a story with her husband in it and her parents in it and her sister. And I don't know how much of it is based on a real true life event. But at the end of the book, she dedicates the book and suggests that people can donate money to charities to help with the cause that the novel deals with. So although it's a novel, it seems, because I've read her memoir, it feels like maybe she's writing about real people. So I really recommend reading Priest Daddy and then reading this book, Nobody's Talking About This. And then the other book I loved this year, which has got something in common, is Notes from Underground by Dostoyevsky. And I was always put off reading that before because Notes from Underground makes it sound to me like it's student notes about another book. I know it sounds really silly to be put off by something as simple as the word notes, but it's incredible. It's almost about an incel. It's almost about one of those men that do the, what's that thing where you grab women in the street without their permission? What's that called? Flatishness? No. Called something, isn't it? Pickup artists.
Oh, right, okay.
Pickup artists kind of grabbing what they want, and incels, involuntary celibate. So it's this man who's a real heel and really broken and damaged, and he sees a man insults him, and so he spends what seems like a year planning how he can bump into the man to show him that he's his equal. And it's just incredible. It's desperate and powerful, and he just spirals down, and you don't want him to spiral. Even though he's objectionable, you want him to be all right. And he nearly finds love, and it's devastating. And what these two books had in common for me was what your previous guest was talking about, and I'm afraid I didn't catch his name. Richard or Adam?
Anil.
A man with Anil, sorry, I didn't catch the name because of my technology, but they've both got bits of, like he said, bits that are so beautiful you want to write them down and reread them over and over again. So they're my two favourite books of this year. And I'm currently reading
Notes from the Underground. I might be wrong about this, but I think Magazine's excellent songs from under the floorboards, I think is partly inspired by Notes from Underground, but I might be wrong. And what are you reading at the moment? Because I think it's a book that's one of my favourite books, if you're still reading the book.
Oh, is it? Before. Yes, I'm reading The Life of Montaigne. Did you say it like that? Montaigne? Yeah. You see, you're getting book reviews here from somebody who famously wrote a book review at school, which went book, Jungle Book, author unknown, not as good as the film, D. So just bear with. So this is How to Live, Life of Montaigne by Sarah Bachel, and it's just fantastic. I got it from Oxfam for £2.50, but you might have to look online. And it's got a lovely review inside it, which was nice. Came with a review from Guardian in 2011, which is always handy, isn't it? And they very rightly say that it makes you want to read his essays, which is useful. So I'm wanting to read the essays next. But this is superb. It's really, really accessible, but also brilliantly written, beautifully written. And it leads you down lots of lovely new avenues to explore of other writers and philosophers and thinkers. And it's just profound. And I'm so excited about having found it. So that's what I'm reading next. And because I'm at my dad's house, my parents' house, I've been given a few books. So after reading Montaigne, I'm going to be reading this mathematics book from the Birth of Numbers by Jan Goldberg. And then I'm going to be reading The Haunting of Toby Jug by Dennis Wheatley.
Let's hope it's not one of those ones that gets racist straight away. I'm sure we did that at the book club once, where I started reading one. Well, we'll stop there. That is. Am I allowed to mention where you are, by the way? Your geographical location, not your street name.
Lovely
Red Ruth. I'm just going to mention because Red Ruth was there's a great secondhand bookshop there in the arcade, which if you are into Colin Wilson books, quite often he has a lot of interesting comics and stuff. There's some great charity shops there, but I thought it's my chance just to name check the kind of the Cornish leg of my tour, which was Liscard Books, which was just beautifully run bookshop. Really loved going to Liscard. Hurley Books in Methegissey, and they gave me an excellent recommendation as well on a sandwich shop, which was run by a woman who used to run the fairgrounds, but then got bored of travelling around all the time. But she still went back to the fairgrounds. She made a lovely sandwich for me there. And also mention Beowulf Books in Falmouth, which is such a beautiful thing. Dom and Alice who run it. It's a bookshop and it's also a pub. It's the best of so many different worlds. And I always find wonderful books there. In fact, I got some Ursula K. Le Guin there. I mentioned her before, and I got some more of that stuff there. And also at the Edge of the World, bookshop at the Edge of the World in Penzance as well, where I did the beautiful Acorn Art Centre with them. So thank you for. I was just going to mention all the excellent Cornish bookshops, and my friend Kate, who put me up in Redruth as well.
I was in Beowulf yesterday, and they've got a lovely book in there about the life of Maurice Sendak. And it's usually $30, and in there it's $6.99. So I might be going back for that.
I think you should.
Have you ever heard of this? This is on the shelf. This is on my dad's get rid of pile. Liam O'Flaherty. I know you're not a novel man, but I've got the world. Are you? World Behind William, Richmal Crompton. I thought that was a man for all my youth. I was very delighted to find out that the William author is a woman, Richmal. And read about her life. Yeah, nice. Also got the
have you been
Philip Larkin letters.
The Falmouth. Have you been to the Maritime Museum?
Not yet, no, but I must go there.
Really good exhibition of mermaids and mermonks as well. I didn't know there was also a form of mermaid, which is basically a monk, half fish, half monk. It's a really lovely exhibition of realities of the strangeness of the undersea world and also the fictions that human beings have made for them. Joanna Neary, it's always a delight to see you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Happy New Year, everyone.
Bye. Go to that shop in Red Ruth. Get me the Geller. I think I need it after all. Thank you, everyone who's watching. By the way, we've still got more to come. Chris Hadfield coming up very, very soon. Also, Portobello Bookshop in Edinburgh. We're going to be hearing from them. A few more books. I mentioned Philip Ball before. Philip Ball's The Modern Myth, which is kind of a little bit of a different thing from doing, but a really fantastic book about the more modern-based myths, including things like Dracula and Jekyll and Hyde and Frankenstein, and then some of the work of people like Alan Moore in terms of what he does with those characters in League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. So that is a very, and I think not enough people. Philip Ball is such an incredible writer. Louis Barth, Sunshine and Laughter, this biography of Morecambe Wise, brilliantly deals so much with the build up to their fame and their career in the kind of the halls and in the variety and all that stuff. So I really recommend Louis Barth's book there, Sunshine and Laughter. And this, in fact, I met up with Francesca when I was, again, more name checks of Bookshop. Sorry, I keep forgetting to mention all the Exeter Bookshop, Oxfam Bookshop, where I did a gig there, and Francesca Stavrokopoulou came along, and we're probably going to do a gig there together at some point, actually. It's a really great Oxfam, by the way, that one in Exeter. And during the day, I think I did with a Sidmouth bookshop. Oh man, I've forgotten the name of the Sidmouth bookshop. Anyway, great. Francesca Stavrokopoulou's God and Anatomy is just there's so much you don't get in the Bible when we were growing up in the Hamlin picture version. In the Bible, the battle is fought between Yahweh and the aqueous chaos monster. Yahweh and the aqueous chaos monster. So there's no aqueous chaos monster in my Hamlin children's Bible. So it's a really interesting book about the physical nature of God. So that's another of the books of the year. I'm then going to try and deal with a few more piles. Oh, this, by the way, the Aqueous Chaos Monster is not in the World of the Unknown Monsters, but Usborne, as you may well know, have brought back these books like UFOs and ghosts and stuff and monsters, which I actually, there we go, wrote the introduction for the foreword or whatever it is. But it's a joy to have these books back again as well. But now we are going to hear, who are we going to hear from actually, first of all? Let's think. Let's go to Portobello Bookshop. I hope you know Portobello Bookshop. And then also we're going to hear from the wonderful Blackwall's Bookshop in Oxford, which is such an incredible bookshop because it's such a small frontage. And then you go inside. And again, it's one of those kind of Borges things of just the strangeness of just how enormous it seems to be. But anyway, here are two of the bookshops that I visited. First of all, Portobello Bookshop. Hello, here's another book that was absolutely superb, which some of these books seemed like they're such a long time ago, but they weren't really that long ago. Nina Simone's Gum by Warren Ellis of The Dirty Three and The Bad Seeds. And it's all, it's about collecting really and keeping things. And it is about this piece of gum that Nina Simone placed on the piano on the Steinway when she went to play Nick Cave's Meltdown. And again, it's a book filled with beauty and love. I'll quickly mention some of the recommendations you've been sending in as well. Nigel, Steve Aylett's Hyperthick. Steve Aylett, who you might know from Lint, from his excellent book Heart of the Original, hugely recommend that in terms of ideas of creativity, has done a new one of his comic books, which is this incredible mix of kind of old out of copyright, quite banal comic strips, and then he has repopulated the caption balloons, and they are just absolutely fantastic. So Steve Aylett's Hyperthick, which is up to issue 2, and I presume issue 3 is imminent. Emma recommends Black Teeth and a Brilliant Smile by Adele Stripe. Matty and Jamie, Jerusalem by Alan Moore, which you probably actually began when Jerusalem first came out. out, because it is enormous. It wouldn't surprise me if it took you all the way to 2021 to finish. Andy recommends Pandora's Jar, which you've got Natalie Haynes, which I would highly recommend. Helga Land recommended, highly recommended as well. And Rebecca Ragg Sykes' Kindred. Then Come Fly the World, The Women of Pan Am at War and Peace by Julia Cook. Shuggy Bane by Douglas Stewart. Very excited by the new Douglas Stewart, and I know that he apparently does want to come on to Book Shambles again, so I'm pleased about that. And that Old Country Music by Kevin Barry, who was also on a Book Shambles earlier this year. Lots of people saying that they quite enjoyed the book by local radio idiot. I mean, local radio as in it's just broadcast in the UK, but available podcast. Robin Ince is The Importance of Being Interested. Thank you. It's very kind. I don't know who said that, but whoever did, thank you for liking my book. It was one of the loveliest things to get Carla Ravelli to actually read my book and then give me a quote, which, there's certain things we go, that was really lovely. Louise would recommend Panenka by Ronan Hessian. Lots more people also say Mrs. Death, so good. Emma, I Am Legend. I'm so glad you listened to read I Am Legend. Sarah recommends again Listen by Catherine Mannix, as I mentioned before, absolutely fantastic. And then also, I'm not sure if it's the same Sarah or another Sarah, recommends Dead Souls by Ian Rankin. I'm always happy to recommend Ian Rankin as well. Now, as I said, Chris Hadfield coming up very, very soon. And if you can support us via Patreon, you don't support us via Patreon yet, that is absolutely amazing. It really, really helps us, because I think we're about to see, well, I've already seen some tour that I was meant to be doing in February isn't happening anymore. It's nice now to have this kind of tradition of crossing out hoped for dates in a diary over and over again. But now joined by he's so many different things, because he is an author, he's an incredible enthusiast, he's a historian. I mean, the archivist, most incredible archive work. And we did a couple of volumes of horror short stories, or uncanny short stories, called Dead Funny. And he is Johnny Mains. Hello, Johnny. Hello, Johnny.
Hello.
Good. You've done some with your facial hair again. You've got Christmas facial hair.
Yeah. Wing Commander Mains is back.
Now, can I check? You've got Plague behind you. Do you prefer Plague of Zombies to The Reptile?
I don't like The Reptile. It's one of Mark Morris's horror author, Mark Morris's favourite film. I never got on with it. I've got the poster for it, but I've not stuck it up. I love Jacqueline Pierce, but nah.
No, fair enough. I'm pretty much in agreement with. I'm not that keen on the Gorgon either, but I'm sure we can debate that another time. So this year, what have been? I mean, it's been an amazing thing to Lucy McKnight-Hardy, who you recommended. Well, in fact, I'd read her first book, and then you get. But that is an incredible anthology, isn't it?
It is for a debut collection, up there with her debut novel, What Shall Refuse Him. This. Dead Relatives is my book of the year. It starts off with the novella Dead Relatives, about a wee lassie who lives in a house with Clippity Pete and Cook, and it's like a kind of house that brings women in, and then the story she has a tree that she visits, and it is just one of the most. I read the novella when Lucy had first written it. And I was very, very privileged to kind of be a beta reader and kind of give thoughts and bits and bobs. And I remember finishing it and typing, because of my ADHD, I just went straight onto Facebook and went, I've just read the best novella ever. Wait until next year. And yeah, but not that. There's a short story in here called Resting Bitch Face, which was in Black Static. That's in there. The Devil of, what's it called? Tim and Fire. It's just Wretched, Badger Face. This is the book. If you want to go out and buy a book that will just do everything. A lot of people say that she's like Shirley Jackson, has shades of Robert Aikman. She's not, because she's her own beast. She has her own style. She has a way of writing which is just incredible. I love her. I just can't get enough of her stuff. Rolling for the next stuff. And I saw her do a reading in Manchester a few months ago, and she just grabbed everybody in that room, and they were, just kind of. She read from the first novella, Dead Relatives, and she just grabbed everybody and didn't let go. She's she's one set for really, really, really big things. I think there's a few authors at the moment that that are going to pave the way for the next 10, 15 years in British genre writing, and she's definitely up there with one of them. Of course, we've got.
I will say, War Chill Refused Me. If you've not read that yet, you should really read. And because you've mentioned it, allows me to then quickly mention some other books. That bookshops I'm going to say thank you to, because I met her when I did an event at the Ledbury Bookshop. So Ledbury Bookshop, thank you. Malvern Books, which is cooperative, absolutely fantastic. It had most bookshops when you go to them, and I'm sure you've done events where you go to a bookshop, and if you ever go, can I just go and use your loo? They go, oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, you can, but it's in a terrible state, right? Because it's always still part of the store or whatever. The Malvern Bookshop is the only one which was not only spacious but also had a toboggan in it, suggesting that it was for anyone who died on the toilet and wanted to think of Citizen Kane as they went. So Malvern Bookshop was fantastic. Penguin Books as well in Shrewsbury. Thank you very much to them. Westwood. Oh man, I've not mentioned it yet. Sorry, I'm just going to quickly grab this because some of the lovely bookshops gave me presents, which was an absolute treat. Westwood Books in Sedbergh, which is a real go to Westwood Books. You would love it. It's just they gave me this. It's Shelley's works from the 1860s, an 1860s edition.
Lovely.
Which is nice to have. And I've got another quite old Shelley one, a bit older than that. But the reason they gave it to me is because this was given to George Darwin, Charles Darwin's son, for his first year. So they know that I'm a huge Charles Darwin fan. So they thought, oh, wouldn't it be nice if he had a something that had a kind of Darwin link? So anyway, that you would just give me an alibi to mention. I also haven't mentioned Forum Books in Corbridge, and they also have a new book in Alnwick, Bookshop in Alnwick as well. And they are Forum Books. Go and look, and they've got there's a little one they've got in Newcastle as well, and Whitley Bay as well. So I'm really sorry, by the way, all the bookshops that I don't mention, because every single one was just it was a fantastic experience. I think the day that I saw you, where'd I been? I'd been to Ivy Bridge. Totnes, the beautiful bookshop in Totnes, playing the cinema. Day before, I've been to Oakhampton. So many brilliant bookshops. What were you going to recommend next?
Right, the next one is the biography of Anton Walbrook by James Downs. So Anton Walbrook, Gaslight, Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, Red Shoes. This is amazing. Yeah, when you think about Anton Walbrook, you have to compartmentalize his German films and his his English speaking films. Then you realize you don't know anything about him. And then what James did, he spent 10 years researching this, and goes into about how Walbrook might have had a Jewish and that's why maybe he had to leave Germany and didn't come back. Also, homosexuality. And it is just one of those books that it deserves to be known. It's quite an expensive one. It's done by Peter Lang. So it's like about 70 quid. I was gifted this copy. But if you can get it, maybe get it through your library. It's definitely one of them. And then my last one is the psychoanalysis of artificial intelligence. But you would go, but Johnny, you don't have two beans in your brain to rub together. This is about AI and AI and pleasure and sex bots. But then it also introduced me to the works of psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan, and then Immanuel Kant, who I'd never even heard of before. So this is by Isabel Miller. She is really up there. And she this was a really, really critical book. I don't really read these kind of things, but I loved it. And everybody, if you can go out and get that as well, this will just blow your mind. It blew my mind. I'm still recovering 8 months afterwards.
Yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to reading that. That is, I've been following her work, and
Mel Brooks, I'm reading that.
Jamie wants. Oh, it's always worth reading about Mel Brooks. What a remarkable! I still find it amazing when he was on the One Show, and the presenters obviously imagined that because he was 95, they'd have to be. He didn't quite understand what was going on, and they did that bit where they started to fill in too quick, give a little bit of a gap. It's okay to have a little bit of gap, but within 2 minutes he was running circles round them. Jamie, by the way, wants a recommendation from you, Johnny, in terms of she wants a novel that is really, really scary.
I always think let the right one in. Oh God, what's his name? Jean Adré Lindqvist. Yeah, the vampire novel Let the Right One In. Absolutely love it. It's been a while since I've read it, so I'll probably have to reread it again. I think we should probably mention Anne Rice's Interview with a Vampire. That really got me going when I was a teenager. I'd never really read anything like that before. And then if you really want to go for something minging, The Homunculus, a good old New English Library one. And then a book that really scares me is Pet Sematary. And, Stephen King's getting in a little bit of controversy at the moment. Somebody on Twitter today was going on that King goes, attacks fat people in his fiction and stuff. So that's another thing. But Pet Sematary, because I've got Marnie, I used to love that book. And ever since my child was born, I've never really been able to bring myself to either read the book again or watch the film. And the more distance I have from my last reading of the book, the more and more scared I get while wanting to read it. But you've got The Reddening by Adam Neville. That's his new novel that's come out.
That'll do enough. That's enough. That Jamie, I hope that Johnny, thank you very much for joining us. We should just mention we're doing hoping to do a third volume of Dead Funny. If you've not read Dead Funny or Dead Funny Encore, where we've got stories by an enormous number of people. In fact, Izzy Sooty was on earlier. We've got Izzy in there. We've got Josie Long in there. We've got Alice Lowe in there. We've got Charlie Higson in there. There's a really great story by Reece Shearsmith. But we want to do a third volume, and that's currently we're just trying to where's the best place for people to go if they are interested?
Just go to Unbound and then type in the third Dead Funny Book of Horror Stories. You can pledge there. You could even have your name used by Robin in a horror story, and he will kill you off in it.
Johnny, thank you so much. Have a very happy new year. I'll see you in 2022. Always follow Johnny's stuff, see what he's up to. As I said, the incredible anthologies, some really interesting anthologies of kind of forgotten female writers who wrote of the ghosts and uncanny ideas and stuff. Go and look up Johnny's work. It's really there's one of the books I was actually given. I think I was given this when I was in Taunton at the Taunton Bookshop. There, the third ghost book by Lady Cynthia Asquith. So in a minute we're going to be joining Chris Hadfield. Give it that by the way is a really great book. Chris Hadfield's The Apollo Murders, because I don't normally read books of kind of thriller, like when I say normal thrillers, and this, having not really read a thriller for about 4 years, very, very thrilling. And it turns out people I know who spend a lot of time reading thrillers go, rather annoyingly, Chris Hadfield not only is an astronaut and sang in space and is an incredible inspirational figure and one of the greatest people in terms of explaining what it is to be a human being going into space and the importance of it, he also is very good at writing thrillers as well. So we're going to hear from him in a minute. This, by the way, is my favourite title of a book that I bought. This was when I was up in Barnard Castle, where I picked up Dead Men Don't Ski. So there we go. There's a bit of advice. They're dead men. They do not ski. Now, I think we're going to go to Luke. Oh, no, we're not. In fact, well, there we go. We're going to go to Chris Hadfield. So here are Chris Hadfield's recommendations of books of 2021.
Hi, Robin, and all my very best of Christmas time to you. My favorite books. I've got a whole bunch on the shelves over here. But when I was a kid, I read Jules Verne's Mysterious Island. And that really inspired me as to the strength of human spirit and what we can accomplish. So I really recommend Mysterious Island, especially the first, 80% of it. And then when I was a little older, I read Carrying the Fire. This book here by Mike Collins. And I think it's one of the great spaceflight books talking about the reality of what it's like to be an Apollo astronaut, but also, that's my puppy, but also, Henry, come here, just say hi for a sec so everybody knows that you're right there by the microphone. There we go. There's, yes, you're a good boy. Yeah, you're helping me out. Attaboy. Okay, back up. There you go. Lie down. So this was an excellent, thoughtful, insightful book that really helped me prepare for a life of being an explorer and a test pilot and an astronaut, and what comes afterwards. And then recently I read a book called Factfulness by Hans Rosler that's really helpful in understanding what's going on in the world, you know, the reality of it, and not just everybody's screaming misperceptions, but the actual world itself. But, you know, there's 2 million books a year published, and I think the important thing is to read. I'm a member of the Canadian Children's Literacy Foundation. I'm on the board of that. I work hard to try and help promote literacy, the exchange of ideas. It's never been more important to be literate, computer literate, digitally literate, and to be able to share in the original thoughts of others. Anyway, have a fine Christmas time holiday, and I look forward to seeing you soon in the Happy New Year. Take care.
And in a minute, we're going to be joined by Luke Wright, who is more often than not the favourite thing people see at the Long Weekend Festival, which is infuriating because I never am. Bastards. Anyway, this I'm quickly going to run through books that I loved finding. This was also in the Hayes Cinema Bookshop. Stanley Baker, Portrait of an Actor, is really fascinating. Anthony Storey, who predominantly was a psychologist and wrote books of psychology. This, I think, was his first book. He also was the son of a miner. He'd had a similar background to Stanley Baker. It was going to be a kind of biography, or maybe even ghostwritten autobiography. I'm not sure of Stanley Baker, but he started to meet him just as Stanley Baker got ill with cancer. So it's about the 8 meetings he had as Stanley Baker became more and more ill. And it's a really interesting book there. This, by the way, what a treat. Peter, who I did gigs with up in the Northeast, gave me a biography of Will Hay. I love having things like that. So that's a treat. The second most expensive book that I bought in Oxfam was, here we go. Is it the Oxfam? Are they watching? Bath Oxfam Bookshop, An Index of Possibilities, which is kind of the British version of the Whole Earth catalogue. It was 35 quid. This is what I always do in Oxfam. I go, yeah, but I'm not really buying a book, £35, am I? It's really a charitable donation. That's what I pretend. And one of the reasons I've used a bookmark there, by the way, is a picture of David Farrar there, actually signed by him, who you may remember from such films as Black Narcissus. I bought this book because it has a great cartoon of Kurt Vonnegut. So that was one of the reasons. And also it's just interesting. It's one of those books where I imagine I'll turn it into something. Also a Ron Cobb cartoon, and I'm a big fan of the work of Ron Cobb. And this was here, though, was the most expensive book. And yes, it was you, Exeter Oxfam Bookshop. And I think you only agreed to do the gig because you knew even if no one bought copies of my book afterwards, you knew I'd spend far too much. So £60 on a book about UFOs that I'm probably never going to read. Glimpses of Other Realities. There it is. I like the cover. It's got an introduction by Colin Wilson, and it's called High Strangeness. All I need to do is come up with 3 minutes that involves that in a show, and then I can do the mathematics and work out if I do a certain number of shows at a certain amount of kind of a certain height of fee, it will have paid for itself. I've got to mention this, by the way, Dave McKean. It was his birthday yesterday. Dave McKean, great artist who, you know, as well as his own work, you may well know a lot of the fantastic work he's done with Neil Gaiman and amongst others. Dave McKean's Raptor is a very, very beautiful and uncanny and beguiling book. I think that's just come out now, and there's loads of it. Simon Garfield, they brought out his End of Innocence again. Think of It's a Sin being on television this year, which was a remarkable piece of television. That's just basically about, you know, the beginning of the understanding of AIDS and what went on during that horrible time where so many, you know, Clause 28 and other ugly homophobic things that happened there. Park by the River, Barney Farmer, Coketown, Drunken Baker. And also his incredible work for Viz. This is his new novel, Park by the River, and very much he kind of creates something of a monologue of a character with, I would say, an air of Mark E. Smith about him. So that I highly recommend. And now, The Gallows Pole by Benjamin Myers. Just started reading that. That was given to me by the Bookshop when I was in Halifax, and just really, really fantastically written. The final thing, now we are joined by Luke Wright, the poet Luke Wright. Also knows our good friend Jeff Towns. He's done many gigs for Jeff Towns under the sadly no more mobile library bookshop. This book, man, Luke, Through Darkest Ponderleo, because Jeff always knows how to snare me. And this is a book which is a parody of the kind of colonial explorer, written by Joan Lindsay, who went on to become very famous for writing Picnic at Hanging Rock. By the way, the bookmark in this book is James Mason. And this just gives you some idea of the kind of book it is. April the 1st, The Shingles, Little Wag Hornet. Owing to Papa's half-sister, Teresa, for over 20 years, considering herself either a teapot or a watering can, I forget which, at all events something useful with a spout, we have never known the old lady very intimately. Pointed out to F after a decent interval this morning, it is no use crowing over spilt milk, as her death, though a shock, is no doubt a blessing in wolf's clothing. I mean, being a teapot in a Shropshire in a nursing home must have been very tedious at times, with the best will in the world, though not, of course, referring to her legacy as a teapot. Anyway, it's that kind of book. Joan Lindsay went on to write Picnic at Hanging Rock. Through Darkest Ponderleo has very surreal photographic images as well. So, Luke, right, what's the best book you've picked up from Jeff Towns? I bet you've found some interesting books of poetry or strange.
I have good Jeff Towns stuff. He's always got a little gift for me. And he knows I like Betjeman stuff, and it's Betjeman related. So I've gone there, and actually the thing I treasure most isn't a book. You're going to hate me for saying this, but it is a picture of Betjeman that has been used by the marketing department of a publishing company many years ago, and it's a picture of his head, and it's been Tipexed round. Before we had Photoshop and we could cut people's pictures out, it's been a Tipexed picture of Betjeman, obviously for the inside sleeve of a book. And I have that framed in my house. So
I think it's a great thing to have. In fact, at the Exeter Oxfam Bookshop, had I been even madder, maybe if you'd been with me, they had some weird box set of Metroland. You know, Betjeman's Metro, and I don't quite know what it was, but that was 300 quid.
Long, is it? I mean, it doesn't really warrant a box set. I mean, it's quite a short, it's a 40-minute film, isn't it? Half an hour film or something. So I don't know what it is. My partner got me for Christmas the sort of book that Jeff Towns often gives me, and it's a book about Betjeman called Betjeman Country, and it's something approaching a coffee table book. It's not quite a coffee table book, but it has that kind of vibe about it. Lots of pictures, glossy pages, and it is the story of Betjeman through his places. So you've got Highgate and Cornwall and other parts of London and stuff like that. It's very nice. I've been sitting in my big pink chair. I've got a wing-back chair, and I've been reading about Betjeman and listening to.
I hope you only read about that. I think it's only Betjeman. You listen to Banana Blush sat in that chair.
Yeah, and that's all I do. Yes. So when we're talking to Stuart Lee once, sort of Simon Munnery once about Stuart Lee, and Stuart Lee was doing that thing where he's conducting the audience and commenting over who's laughing and who's not laughing. I said to Simon, "Oh, I love it when he does that," and he went, "Nah." I went, "No, it's good." He said, "No, it'd be good if that's all he did." And in a way, that is all Stuart does these days. But yeah, so just Betjeman. I've been reading Rings of Saturn, which amazingly I've never read, despite the fact that I live in Rings of Saturn land, and it's just the best thing I've ever read. I adore it. I'm going to read it all over again the moment I finished it. I love it that much. It's so rich. There's so much stuff there.
That's weird. I just started reading it again as well.
Really?
Because it is, and it's like, especially if you ever, I started reading it because I was traveling so much, and I thought sometimes when you read someone who is so evocative in the way that they interpret the landscape they're in, with luck, it means that it slightly tints or reopens your eyes in certain landscapes, because if you're reading enough of those, like reading Ian Sinclair and things like that, you go, oh right, today's vision is enhanced by beautiful writers.
Well, my mate said, another East Anglian boy, Thatcher, actually lives around these parts, and he said that he first read that book when he was in Australia, miles and miles away from home. And actually, that's a nice way of. I mean, I've been reading it as I'm in rainy December-y Suffolk, but he read it when he was holed up in a hostel somewhere in Sydney, and so it was a great way of reimagining, getting back into Suffolk. Yeah.
Now, what if, weirdly enough, I remember being in Brisbane and it was 2 a.m, and I turned on telly and it was an episode of Midsummer Murders, which was brought up, which was in the village I was brought up in.
They've got no culture clash there. So that was the thing I noticed about gigging in Australia. You don't have to explain who Phil and Kirsty are. They know all of it. They know all of it. How shit TV, it's fantastic.
But that's like one of the things I taught. That strange thing that sometimes you can also find in places you don't expect. Like, I don't know if you heard Adam Buxton interviewing Laurie Anderson, But one of my favourite things is that they mainly talked about kind of folding bikes and things like that. But then it turned out that Laurie Anderson was a big fan of the Grumpy Cornish Doctor series, Doc Martin. And somehow you can't believe that Laurie Anderson, creating so many intriguing avant-garde pop things, that she goes, I just want to relax now and watch a bit of Martin Clunes.
I've been watching nothing but Endeavour the Christmas period, which if you've not watched Endeavour, this is the Morse, the early years. It's fucking great. I love it, and it's if for no other reason, that you just get to sink back into the mid 1960s, and not the cool, fashionable mid 1960s of pop culture, but the mid 1960s where the 60s only happened to 6 people and they all lived in London. You know, this is the real 60s of, it's fantastic. It's got Roger Allam in it, who plays Morse's sort of mentor.
I always think Roger Allam in his voice has a little bit of Michael Gambon about him. Gambon.
And he's not playing posh Roger Allam. He's playing sort of, don't you come a crop with me, son, kind of Roger Allam. It's beautiful. I love it. It's just.
Have you seen the one with the tiger?
Yeah, I just watched that one. Yeah.
That's an interesting one, isn't it? So you're going on tour, aren't you?
Well, I hope I'm on tour, Robin. I think you might have done your tour at the right time. Who knows? But hopefully, yes. I mean, it does. It's looking hopeful. And we set off in late January, and it's about 30 dates through to May, mostly in sort of March, April sort of time. And hopefully, I'm going pretty much everywhere. You know that thing, you post your tour dates online and all the response you get is like, what, aren't you coming and such, and that was always the town you're in like 3 weeks before. And
yeah. Oh, I see you never play Middlesbrough. I did on Tuesday.
Tell me. Yeah.
Actually, Middlesbrough was one of my most poorly attended gigs some years ago. And then but when I got to this theatre, which even the cab drivers didn't know where it was, the first thing they said to me was, well, you've sold a lot more than Nicholas Parsons. So that was, and then the next day on the train platform, 3 people on a Sunday came up to me and went, what are you doing in Middlesbrough? I was doing a gig. Already, this is almost bigger than the people asking what I'm doing in Middlesbrough is slightly larger than yesterday's the actual gig.
Yeah. Well, we've all been there. I don't think I've ever done a gig in Middlesbrough. So you've got one. Stockton, yes.
Stockton's lovely. Yeah, what was it? Oh man, I forgot the name of the beautiful bookshop in Stockton. They got a really great. I did the Arc there, and that was a lot of fun. And Saltburn has a great little bookshop as well.
One of the places I'm going in March, I'm going to Arc, and I haven't been there for a number of years, about sort of 6-7 years now. So it'd be nice to go back.
Go to the lovely bookshop there. Now, you don't have to do a poem, by the way.
I'm happy to poem.
It's always one of those things. There's an awkward segue. I remember once one of my favourite things of seeing Alan Titchmarsh at his most Alan Partridge was when he had Jonathan Morris, the actor who was in Bread, the TV sitcom Bread, and he played a poet in it. And Alan Titchmarsh at the beginning of the interview goes, oh, and have you got a poem for us? And he goes, I don't actually do poetry. It's a character I play. And Titchmarsh looks furious, like he goes, oh, well, someone's not playing the celebrity game, are they? Well, I'm not going to ask you any proper questions. It's absolutely furious.
Oh, dearie me.
So anyway, look, you might be putting words together.
What, sorry?
Go for it.
I'll do a happy poem. This is a happy poem. It's quite a new one. It's a sort of summer poem, though, so we can all close our eyes and imagine we're in summertime. It's called On the First Good Day of the Year, and it's a poem about my mum. So what can be better? Standing in your walled garden in sun hat and summer slacks, as bees busy themselves at the daths, you hold your arms open and my boys rush to you. You're yet to have your second jab, but no, enough's enough. Huge nectar gulps. They almost knock you down. And later, when they shun you for their long-lost toys, we joke about their fickleness. Kids. Kids to whom you were a second mother. Wipe their faces. Fill their plastic cups. Kids you tug through dreaded homework tasks. Kids you've scarcely seen for months. At dinner, dirty and dog thirsty, they gulp glass after glass of water, chilled from your fridge. No one asks for Coke. This water, Gran. This water's just so good. And there you go. That's me.
Thank you so much. Go and see Luke on tour. He really is. It's what he's been doing for the last, it's probably almost 20 years now. He was such a young thing when it all began.
23 years, yeah.
Yeah, and such an important thing in terms of again, like we were talking about Selena before, and her great book Mrs. Death, but all of the different people who are going out there and doing wonderful, vibrant things with poetry. So look up Luke Wright's website, find out if he's coming to a town near you, hopefully, and buy a ticket, because then it means when it is postponed, you will still bother going because you bought a ticket already. So do that. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you. Take care.
Thank you so much, everyone, for watching and joining us. Oh, I mentioned another one. Unfortunately, it's a cloudy night tonight, but Secret World of Stargazing by Adrian, you probably know on Twitter. Really lovely book in terms of just an accompaniment to looking up at the sky and what you might find there on any given day. So there's that's another recommendation. There's loads we didn't get to. I'll talk about them another time. It doesn't really matter, does it? And we're going to be back with loads more stuff in the new year, and we're going to be back with a new series of An Uncanny Hour. And I think, though I might be wrong, I think we're going to end tonight's show with some of the stuff from the Linda Smith lecture that I did back on the 2nd of November. This is the poem that I did, which is online at the moment as well, if you want to find it, all about, well, it was written really because I suppose a couple of months into the pandemic, that sense of kind of loss and when Timbret Taylor died. I kind of explained this in some of the intro you're going to see. This is only a small smidgen, by the way. It's a much longer intro talking about many other things in the full-length Linda Smith lecture, which, by the way, if you do support us via Patreon, you get to see the 17-minute film of this, amongst other things as well as getting access to all the Uncanny Hours that I did with Stuart Lee and Toya Wilcox and loads of other people as well, and all of documentary kind of shows that we did as well of inspirational science and philosophy. So if you can support us via Patreon, that is absolutely fantastic. I hope you have a very happy new year. Thank you very much, everyone, for sending in your recommendations for books as well. Thank you very much to our producer, Trent Burton. And I hope that in 2022, when we're all kind of back on tour and doing things again, that we will see you out there as well. Who knows what is going to happen with... Oh, also, I should mention that there are a few people, obviously, we decided to postpone Nine Lessons, the second two events of Nine Lessons and Carols, just because of such uncertainty over... It was during a period of time of rapid rise in COVID numbers. So because we were in London, we just decided it was best to postpone it. And so that's going to be happening over the Easter weekend. So the two postponed shows, Nine Lessons and Carols, for curious people. We're going to do a really Christmassy show at Easter. Obviously, I would very much hope that we can get Stuart Lee, who sometimes does really grumpy Father Christmas. I hope we can get him to be a kind of grumpy Easter bunny, but I can't be sure whether that would happen. But anyway, that's going to be happening as well. Please do keep supporting Cosmic Shambles, and have a very, very happy new year. And we'll probably do a follow-up to this as a podcast with all the books that we didn't get the chance to mention. Bye-bye. Done stuff. I did a poem a while ago at the end of the Brian Cox, the last tour we did, all about the passing of time. And only one person was furious with it and hated it and said you shouldn't do that poem because it reminded them of someone they'd lost. And I didn't feel happy that I'd made them upset, but at the same time, I knew that I felt I was still doing the right thing. Sometimes it's a battle to kind of do those things. So I mentioned Barry. The final comedian that I mentioned tonight is Sean Locke, who obviously died very recently. I worked with Sean a few times. We weren't friends, but it was an absolute joy to ever work with him. And I wrote on a show with him once, and I just felt like such an idiot because he was so brilliant, and I just had nothing to offer, And I remember very fondly that with Sean once, we did this terrible gig, I think at the end of the 90s. We went up to Edinburgh in December to play a temporary building. It was basically a geodesic dome that had been placed on an ice rink. And it was not a great gig. There was a level of jeopardy that ran throughout the gig with an expectation that the geodesic dome was about to fall in on everyone at any moment, right? So no one could really laugh, partly because the geodesic dome made an enormous amount of noise every time the wind blew, and secondly because people could see that some of it was falling apart. And afterwards, the promoter said, let's go to the pub. And then the more the promoter drank, the more he went on about how brilliant Margaret Thatcher was. And eventually the promoter went to the toilet and Sean and me ran away, giggling into the street. And then we went to a restaurant on the Royal Mile at 1:30 a.m., which looking back was a mistake because I, yet again, had a terrible attack of diarrhea the next morning. I shouldn't have eaten the food that was available at 1:30 a.m. And I remember just going, oh my God, I've got to fly back to London. Oh my God. Oh, and again, I took loads of Imodium. I was like, oh God, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me, right? And I got on the plane just thinking this is going to be the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to me. I've never felt more anxious than now. And I was like, oh God, oh God. And I sat down in my seat just terrified and just sweating. And then I turned round to see who was next to me, and it turned out I was sat next to Anne Widdecombe. And I didn't go again for 9 years. So I wrote this poem about thinking about some of those people. I initially wrote it when Tim died, but this is thinking about many people. It doesn't always have to be comedians, but about the fact that the older I get, the more I don't worry about telling people that I love their work and share and trying to be as positive with them as possible, right? And sometimes it's a battle with all of us when we have all those negative thoughts that are also fighting with us, sometimes negative thoughts that are towards other people, sometimes so much when we're fighting with ourselves. But this is where I will end tonight. Let me celebrate you now as you stand before me, while you can still hear the cheer. Don't let me wait until you're gone to be fond. Don't let fear of embarrassment stifle my delight. How that worry of impending shame leads us to talk about love, only when there can be no response. Derision is easy to dispense and a brickbat easier to receive, so often an acknowledgement of what our self-loathing knew already. We fumble and blush when praised or when praising, waiting to be caught out and rejected. I loved her art. I loved her mind. I loved their work. Past tense. It's hard not to fear the present. Hard to be present. Hard not to bend under a cynic's stare. But keep the volume of things unsaid, the regrets of silence, as thin as it can be. Let it take up little space on the shelf in your head. There's no need to be ashamed of joy, the giving or receiving of it. Avoid all that uselessness of that regret. Worry you've been overwhelming with your adoration far more than fear you've crushed with the negative. And of course, all of this I said in my head as you walk by. Thank you. Here's to Linda Smith.